want to ask you real quick for the benefit of our listeners, because we started off so heavy-handed with Orlando. Will you tell our listeners that may not be familiar with your work exactly what the dynamic of your work, like you are just comedy, acting? The resume was a little bit I saw a lot of TV shows on there, but I wasn't sure if you did skits or are you straight up comedy?
I'm mostly a stand-up comedian. The TV that I've done has primarily been as sort of a cultural commentator, like Best Week Ever or those other VH1 shows where they have talking heads saying funny things about pop culture. Like I've done a lot of that, and I've done it on CNN and CNBC and a few other shows. Most of your listeners, if they know me at all, would probably know me from SiriusXM because I've been on like hundreds of times. My comedy album, Adam Sank Live from the Stonewall Inn, is played regularly on SiriusXM Raw Dog, and I used to be a regular and a fill-in host on the Derek and Romaine show, which no longer exists because they got rid of OutQ. It exists, but not on SiriusXM. So, yeah, but as far as like what I do most of the time, I get on stage and I tell jokes, sometimes naked.
That is a great art form. I took a stab at that a couple of times in the 90s, and I found that I loved scripted comedy. Like, I was really into Seinfeld. I'm sure a lot of people were, but the thing that appealed to me about it was that he was a comic and had those quick bits where he was on stage, but then it was the situational stuff. So I wrote out a few sitcoms, but then I ultimately ended up getting into more dramatic film, and now I'm writing a book that's dramatic. So I guess I'm just no longer funny.
No, I'm sure you are. But stand-up is really, being funny is only a one very small component of it. It's really about being able to get on stage and get an audience to follow you, follow your thought process, and to really follow your stories. Because there's a lot of really funny people that I know in my life who could never do stand-up, and there's a lot of brilliant stand-ups who are not particularly funny when you meet them in person.
Oh, okay.
It's a special skill. It's to me, I started out as a journalist. I was a TV news producer for many years, and so for me it's really about being able to tell a good story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where when you get to the end, you're like, oh, that was satisfying. Now I have something that I didn't have before. That's kind of what stand-up is for me.
Well, and here's where you passed the ultimate. Of course I knew that you had a brain and you probably had thoughts on political issues in Orlando, but I saw it and I thought, comedian, okay, television, talking head. I thought, okay, this is someone that is not just smart, but you are going to analyze situations and you're going to be really well-versed in them. And so I just took a stab at going off the deep end into seriousness from the beginning. But some people that I've heard of as comedians said it's a one act, one bit. No matter how the audience is responding to their material, they're not going to change. They're not going to go a different direction or try a different set. So I knew you weren't one of those, basically.
Well, that's a lazy comedian. And I don't think any comedian who does that can ever really be successful because you've got to constantly be in touch with the audience that's in the room with you that night. Every audience is different. And you have to figure out, you have like 10 seconds when you first get up there to figure out what they want from you and who they are and how to have a discourse with them because it's a two-way conversation. It's not just, you're not in a play. You're not getting up and reading lines. And if you are, it's not going to work.
Last political question I'm going to ask, or not political, I'm sorry, but related to stand-up comedy. So
yes. Comedy
legend Bill Cosby was called out by Hannibal Buress in some of Hannibal Buress's acts. Now, keep in mind, there had been a decade of lawsuits brought by some of the women and attempts to really bring a spotlight to issues going on with Bill Cosby. It just never got any traction. But then comedian Hannibal Buress put Bill Cosby on blast, and all of a sudden you couldn't tune off Bill Cosby. It was on every channel and every tweet. As a comedy icon, what are your thoughts on the fall of Bill Cosby and what you've seen happen with him in this last year?
Well, first of all, I think what Hannibal did was fantastic. And the best comedians, and I would never put myself in this category, but the best comedians are the ones who actually have an impact on the culture. Making people laugh is great, but if you can actually change the conversation and make people get something that they weren't getting before and change the way they're thinking about something. That's real power. That's using your talent for good. And so I applaud Hannibal, because Bill Cosby, to me, is despicable. I have no doubt that he is guilty. Let's say 90% of the women are lying. Let's say 90% are making it up, which I don't believe. That's still a lot of women that he drugged and raped. And even if it only happened one time, that's despicable, and he should go to prison. The fact that Cosby has always held himself up as this arbiter of sort of moral rectitude and how people should behave, and especially how black men should behave, I think that's what really sort of egged Hannibal on and got Hannibal to be like, wait a second, this guy's a rapist, and he's telling us to pull our pants up and not to talk in using black English vernacular. It's shocking. It's sad. I remember when I was a child, The Cosby Show was the greatest thing on television. It was something we all looked forward to every Thursday night. I was never a huge fan of his stand-up. It's not the kind of stand-up that I personally like, but of course I have great respect for his talent and his legendary status as an icon. But he needs to answer for what he's done, and the fact that he has not given a single press conference since this all came out. He has not once stood in front of a microphone and even said, like, I'm sorry that anyone thinks this has happened, even if he denies it. It's just there's something so contemptuous about his silence on this issue. It makes it worse for me.
So being in Hollywood and, it just makes you wonder if there's been kind of a culture of, call it promoters or agents or hotel managers, whoever was involved with all of the steps of Bill Cosby being on the road and all of these things. When we now hear stories like Corey Feldman coming out and saying that within Hollywood there is a level of men that are with these dark agendas to commit sexual abuse, and they said that it happened to both Corey Feldman and Corey Haim. So when we look at the fact that we're hearing about that 30-plus years after Goonies and Lost Boys, where that actually happened on the movie set, and now Bill Cosby finally getting put on blast after having done this since the late 60s, 70s, some people in Hollywood played a role in
absolutely. I think there are thousands of people who are complicit in the exploitation of women in Hollywood and children in Hollywood, because people know what's up. Bill Cosby didn't rape 50 women and not have anyone else know about it. Certainly his wife knew what was going on, but I mean, aside from her, you're right. There are agents, there are managers, there are club owners, there are people who, look, you don't even have to go to abuse, even in the sense of when you have comics who have died of drug overdoses, tragically, and you find out that club owners were paying them in drugs. They would say, do you want cash or do you want heroin? Oh, I'll take the heroin. All right. I mean, to me, that's a crime because you're basically helping someone kill himself. So I do think there are a lot of toxic elements in our celebrity culture, and I think that celebrities have to be held to the same standard as everyone else. And, when you see someone like Mark Salling from Glee getting busted for child pornography, it's shocking, but he shouldn't be treated any differently from any other person convicted of that crime. No. If he is convicted.
Not as far as the prosecution. No, same thing with Jared from Subway. The standard of the law should be applied. Now, we could get into this 6-month sentence, but that's a whole other Oprah. I do want to just make sure that we give props to Corey Feldman for coming out and telling what I'm sure is a very personal and difficult story of sexual abuse. And obviously Corey Haim, rest in peace, is not here to tell his side of it, but it just changes the entire perspective of everything that I've ever thought about the two Coreys, to hear that men at the top level of these Hollywood films with so much power was able to sexually abuse them and continue on shooting the project as if it was a normal production. That's disturbing.
Absolutely. It's disgusting, and I do think it's good that it's finally coming to light and it's being talked about more now than ever. There was that lawsuit against Bryan Singer that I don't think really went anywhere, but I think these issues have to be discussed because, a 16-year-old boy or girl cannot give consent, period, especially when they're with someone who is rich and powerful and has great influence over their life and their career. They are unable to give consent. So even if, I was having this argument in Fire Island last weekend with a bunch of gay guys, and they were saying, oh, man, when I was 16, I was horny, and I would have been happy to do this or that with this adult or that adult. And I said, no, maybe you would have felt that way at the time, but it still would have been hugely damaging to you. And it would have been really, really immoral as well as illegal. So I just
thought
think
of Roman Polanski. There you go. There's someone that was convicted and has been on the lam, successfully making award-winning films since, 1977. And it's like, dude, you might have only had to do a couple of years and then go on probation. Like, this could have been settled by, 1981 and done and over with.
Well, that case is, I agree with you. That case, though, there were a lot of nuances to it. The fact is that the prosecutor and the judge in the case did not behave ethically. And I don't defend Polanski one bit, and I think that he should have served jail time. But he basically made a plea bargain, and then they didn't keep their end of the plea, which you can't do. And that's why he fled.
Right. Okay, I see.
The two documentaries about that case are kind of fascinating, especially because they interviewed the victim, who says that she doesn't think Polanski should serve any time at this point, and that she would kind of like the whole thing to go away.
Right, and that's something that the courts don't always take into account at this point when you've got states bringing the charges and there's a statute they have to follow. Oregon has a really big problem, by the way, with the law called Measure 11 that applies some very heavy-handed sentences to things that by any other standard might have been supervision without prison time, and the judges have no leniency, no discretion power. It's just a mandatory 70 months. You're going away for 6.5 years if your crime falls under Measure 11. There's no negotiation because it's the law.
At the end of the day, I just want to make it clear to your listeners, I'm not defending Roman Polanski. He was a grown man, an adult, who drugged and raped a 13-year-old girl. I think he's disgusting. And I do think if he comes back to this country at any point, he should serve a sentence, at the very least.
Yeah, I think there's been discussions between the camps, and we've been trying to find a way to extradite him. It's an ongoing process. I want to give you the chance to tell the listeners where they can find some of your work. If it's online, do they need to catch you in clubs? What's the best way to get Adam Sank?
Well, this has probably been the most unfunny interview I've ever given. We've talked about Trump and rape and mass killings, but I promise you I really am funny sometimes. So they can go to AdamSank.com. That's AdamSank.com. They can find me on Twitter at AdamSank. I'm on YouTube, Instagram, everywhere. I'm Adam Sank. I use my real name for everything, so it's easy to find me. And I love to travel to other cities and perform at gay clubs and bars and venues. So if your listeners are looking for someone to come visit them, they should talk to their local club owner and have them contact me at AdamSank.com.
Definitely. And if you breeze through here, through Portland, Oregon, let me know. But
I would love it.
Thank you, Adam. The Orlando set the tone for all of the conversations that we're having this week. We just feel it would do a disservice if we didn't kind of engage with other community partners about this.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to let you
totally get it.
I'm going to let you.
Right.
I'm going to leave it on a question just talking about the LGBT community, of which we're all a part of. Do you think that this can be a big coming together moment for us, a chance for unity, both within this country and worldwide, as you see these vigils and you see monuments lit up with the rainbows? Do you think this could be a coming together moment?
I do. I do look for the silver linings. And I have seen, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, some really beautiful things come out of this tragedy. I think sometimes Americans are at their best